Hello. Today I'd like to show you how to make a block called Road to Oklahoma. I've been having a look through some of the traditional blocks, fairly simple blocks, things that I can make using 2.5-inch squares. And this one came up and it's actually a fun block. It's not one I've made previously, but I've made a small quilt using 4 of the blocks so that you can see this is actually one block, a quarter out here. And so these, when you get 4 of these together, they form this star, and this other line of squares will form a nice chain. So on a larger quilt it could be very exciting, and of course you don't have to do it in these colours. You could do it in scrap, you could do it in all sorts of different colourways and things. So I just thought I'd show you today how to make the block. So the block's going to measure 8.5 inches square, so an 8-inch finished block, and I'm using all 2.5-inch squares to achieve that. So some of them we've got to join to make the half square triangles, and some of them, so you can actually break this block down. I should have just had a block just to show you, I guess, into quarters, so that you can make 2 lots of 4 patches and then 2 of these bits with the half square triangles in it, so that there's kind of 4 little blocks that make up the one block in the way of simplifying it. So I've already made a couple of bits, but I'll just run through how to do that for you. So obviously a 4 patch, I'm sure most of us know how to do a 4 patch, but these are my colours that I'm using, so they just need to be alternated. So we'll quickly pop those through the sewing machine and make a little 4 patch. So you need 2 of these for each block, and as I said, just 2.5-inch squares. For each block you need 4 of this one that's going to form the chain, and the darker colour that I've used that's going to form the star, you need to have 6 of those for each block, and you needed, I think it was 10 of the white or whatever your chosen background is for the other colour. So it's great fun to use 2.5-inch squares. Often we've got some bits and pieces left over that are that measurement, so a scrappy quilt would work really well. Let's bring this iron across a bit. So I'm just pressing these seams one way now, usually towards the darker fabric, and in this case when I've got white, definitely towards the coloured fabric, because the white lets seams show through. You can't help some seams showing through with this sort of quilting, and overall when it's all finished and quilted it very rarely causes any problems if you can see the odd seam, because it kind of just disappears into the quilt. So we'll just make our 4 patch. This is quite a fun block, and as I said, relatively simple. It kind of fits the traditional 4 patch type of block formation, and also contains 4 patches, so how convenient is that? So that's my little 4 patch, and again, you could, if you were making a lot of these, you could chain piece them, and as I said, it would look great in scrappy colours. So that's going there. Now, to make this little corner piece, we need to have 1 of our background squares and 1 of the darker colour for the stars. So to make these triangle bits that are in this block, you need 1 of the background squares and obviously 1 of your darker or your coloured squares. So I've already prepared my white squares here. I've drawn a line, and I tend to use, and it's disappeared, here it is, my mechanical pencil. I find these really good for drawing lines because they're just nice and fine, and they're always that sort of sharpness that you need. So I've drawn a line through the diagonal of my square, and then I've just moved my ruler across so that my 1/2-inch mark sits over that line, and I've drawn my second line 1/2 inch away from the diagonal. And this is so that I'm going to actually sew on both of those lines, so that I'm not wasting this triangle over here. It can be used later, and I'll show you in just a minute. So we need to do 2 of these, and this is because we're using the 2.5-inch squares. There's other ways of making half square triangles, but I wanted to do it all with these 2.5-inch squares. So this way allows you to do that, and rather than just wasting that, we're going to save that by doing that second line of sewing. So I'm just going to come in and sew along on my drawn line with a long diagonal one. And again, if you were making a larger quilt, you could chain piece these. You can just pop the next one in and just keep sewing if you've got a heap of them ready. So you need to do 4 of these for each block. I've already done 2, and I'm just doing 2 now, just to show you. So then I'm going to come back and sew my other 2 drawn lines. So right on that line. So this is kind of fun. It's a little bit tedious to sit and draw all the lines, but sometimes we're sitting chatting or watching a bit of TV, and those are the sorts of things you can do and have a whole pile ready and then just chain piece them through when you're making your quilt without any drama at all. So now I've sewn on both my drawn lines, and I'm just going to cut those apart now. So you want to cut halfway between the 2 lines. So most rulers have something like a 1/4 inch line in from the edge. So if you lay that 1/4 inch in line right over your first long line of stitching, you'll find that where you're going to cut now is right halfway between your 2 sewing lines. And so what that will now give us is this half square triangle that we're looking for to make a quilt block. And instead of just throwing these away or having a lot of triangles that we're not sure what to do with, because you've done that extra sewing line, you've got a smaller one ready for the next project, or maybe you'll use it in the borders, or I don't know what you're going to do with it, but it's there for when you want to do something with it. So now I'm just going to press these again into the darker colour. And they come out just exactly the right size when we do it this way. It's wonderful. And now we need to make up this little 4 patch for the corner. And so we've got it so that you've got the dark square here and your 2 triangles are touching it there, and then just one of the background squares. So we'll make that up into its own little 4 patch. And then we can join the 4 patches and hop on our road to Oklahoma. Interesting names, some of the blocks. It would be interesting to know the history of why it's called that. I'm guessing somebody was on the road to Oklahoma when they worked out this design. Back in those pioneering days when every scrap of fabric was saved to be used for something, or left over from clothing, worn out clothing that they could use up the bits and pieces. So if you press your seams in opposite directions, that will just nestle in nicely when we come to do that seam, which we're going to do now. So I'll just join that up. So some of the traditional blocks can be made with today's fabrics. As you can see, you can change the whole look of a quilt by using different fabrics. They have some really interesting elements, some of the blocks. And when you join some of them up, like with this one, when I saw it just as a block, I didn't necessarily think that it was going to form a chain and stars until I started playing around with the design, of course. So now I've got all my little 4 patches, and I'm going to lay these out. There's a great temptation to put these dark ones in the middle. Please don't do that. They go to the far corners. They're going through that way, and these are the darker corners on the outside, or whatever colour you're using, of course. So now we just need to join our 4 patches up to make our block. So I'm going to do that quickly here. Such delicious fabrics that I'm using. And pick up the next one. I find it very helpful to lay my block out like I'm doing and then pick up the units. Or if you're doing lots of blocks, you might have piles of the units ready to go, so that you can't really join the wrong ones the wrong way. You have everything set in order. We like to think that we're all orderly, don't we? The reality is always something quite different. Okay, now I'm going to press these. So press one seam going one way. In fact, if you sit them both round the same way for for pressing purposes, when you turn it round to put the block together, so you can see I press them both the same, then when we join it up, because this one will get turned around to join, those seams are now going in opposite directions, which is really helpful for that little nestling thing in the middle there. So now make sure you do the right seam, that it's this one here, not this one out here. It would be an unusual block. And then our block will be done. So we're measuring 8.5 inches, which will be an 8-inch finished block. Delicious in any number of colour combinations. I quite like this one that I've done. It's sort of a black, and it's my darker colour is almost a sort of a greeny black colour, and then that lovely dot. Which all stands out nicely against the white. But you might prefer a different colour background, scrappy colours for your stars, a different colour for your chain. So many things you can do. Okay, just get a nice iron so that it sits nice and flat. And there is our block. So on its own, possibly slightly an uninteresting block until you start combining it with itself. I'm sure you could combine it with something else if you chose to. But you can see that that block is a quarter of what I've done there. And so that when you put them all together, you'll get this star with this chain in between, and so these will form stars again and the chain will continue on. So I just thought that was a really fun block. I'm quite enjoying having a little play with some of the traditional blocks, and as I said, I was trying to do something with 2.5-inch squares and everything worked. So enjoy the road to Oklahoma.